What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight I've got 3 stories for you that happened in what most people consider the safest places in America. Quiet suburban neighborhoods where everyone knows their neighbors and kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. But as you'll hear tonight, even these picture-perfect communities hide some pretty dark secrets. Before we jump into tonight's stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Alright, let's get into it. This first story comes from a woman named Sarah who lived in a development called Maple Ridge outside of Cincinnati. Sarah was 34, worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and had just bought her first house. A modest 2-story colonial with white shutters and a small front porch. The kind of place she'd dreamed about since she was a kid. Maple Ridge was one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looked like it belonged in a magazine. Perfect hedges, flower beds that looked professionally maintained, and not a single piece of trash anywhere. Sarah's neighbors were mostly families with young kids and a few retirees who'd lived there for decades. About 3 weeks after moving in, Sarah started noticing small things. Her garbage cans would be moved from where she left them on the curb. Not knocked over by wind or animals, deliberately repositioned. Sometimes they'd be lined up perfectly straight, other times arranged in strange patterns. At first she figured it was just some neighbor with OCD trying to keep the street looking neat. But then she found the notes. The first one was tucked under her windshield wiper on a Tuesday morning. Plain white paper, block letters written in black ink. "Your house looks lonely." Sarah kept the note but didn't think much of it. Maybe it was someone's idea of a welcome message, though it struck her as odd. The second note appeared a week later, this time slipped through her mail slot. "I watch you leave for work at 7:23 a.m. That one made her stomach drop. Sarah worked different shifts at the hospital, sometimes days, sometimes nights. She'd only left at 7:23 a.m. twice since moving in. The third note was waiting on her kitchen counter when she got home from a 12-hour shift. Her doors had been locked. Her windows were still locked. But there it was, same handwriting. "I know you live alone." Sarah called the police, but they couldn't do much with anonymous notes and no signs of forced entry. The officer who came out was polite but clearly thought she was overreacting. "Probably just neighborhood kids," he said, though Sarah couldn't imagine any kid writing something so unsettling. 2 days later, Sarah came home to find her back door unlocked. She was certain she'd locked it that morning. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken, but someone had been inside. She could feel it. That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept hearing small sounds, footsteps on gravel, a gate closing, what might have been whispering outside her bedroom window. Every time she worked up the courage to look, the yard was empty. Around 3 a.m., she heard her front door open. Sarah grabbed her phone and crept to the top of the stairs. Below, she could see a figure moving around her living room with a small flashlight. It was a man, average height, wearing dark clothes. He wasn't taking anything, just walking around, looking at her things. She called 911 and whispered her address. The operator told her to stay upstairs and keep the line open. The man seemed to know the layout of her house perfectly. He moved through the rooms without bumping into furniture or making unnecessary noise. He even knew where she kept her coffee mugs, opening that specific cabinet and taking one out. When the police arrived, the man was gone. The front door was still open, and Sarah's coffee mug was sitting on the kitchen table, freshly used. The police found no fingerprints, no other evidence. But they did find something Sarah hadn't noticed. A small hole drilled in her bedroom wall, right at eye level if someone was crouching in the hallway closet. Sarah moved out the next day. She later learned from a neighbor that the previous owners of her house had also moved away suddenly, though no one seemed to know why. The man was never caught. If you're enjoying these stories, go ahead and smash that like button. Takes 2 seconds and really helps me out. Now let's move on to story number 2. This next story happened to a guy named Marcus who lived in Westfield Heights, a suburb outside Dallas. Marcus was in his late 20s, worked in IT, and lived with his girlfriend Emma in a rental house at the end of a cul-de-sac. Their street was quiet, maybe 8 houses total, most of them owned by families who'd been there for years. The kind of place where people still brought casseroles to new neighbors and everyone knew each other's dogs by name. The house directly across from Marcus and Emma belonged to the Hendersons, Harold and Betty, both in their 70s. Harold was retired from the post office. Betty volunteered at the church. They kept to themselves but were always friendly when Marcus saw them getting their mail or working in their garden. The weird stuff started on a Sunday morning in October. Marcus was having coffee on his front porch when he noticed Harold Henderson standing in his driveway, staring directly at Marcus's house. Not just looking, staring. Completely motionless for at least 10 minutes. When Marcus waved, Harold didn't wave back. Didn't even blink. Just kept staring until Betty called him inside for breakfast. Emma thought Marcus was reading too much into it. "He's probably just zoning out," she said. "Old people do that." But it kept happening. Every morning around 8 a.m., Harold would come outside and stand in the exact same spot, staring at their house for 10 to 15 minutes. Rain or shine, hot or cold, always the same dead expression on his face. Marcus started timing it. 8:03 a.m. to 8:17 a.m. every single day. Like clockwork. After 2 weeks of this, Marcus decided to do something. He walked across the street one morning while Harold was in position and said hello. Harold turned to look at him, and Marcus immediately wished he hadn't gotten involved. Harold's eyes were completely bloodshot, with dark circles underneath like he hadn't slept in months. His breath smelled like something had died in his mouth. "Everything okay, Mr. Henderson?" Marcus asked. Harold stared at him for a long moment, then smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. "Just keeping watch," Harold said in a voice that sounded like gravel. "Making sure everything stays the way it should." Marcus mumbled something polite and went back to his house. But that conversation stuck with him. There was something very wrong with Harold Henderson. The staring continued, but now Harold would wave when he saw Marcus. That same disturbing smile every time. Things escalated the following week. Marcus and Emma were watching TV around 10 p.m. when they heard scratching at their front door. Not knocking, scratching like an animal trying to get in. Marcus looked through the peephole and saw Harold Henderson crouched on their front porch, dragging his fingernails across the door. He was wearing pajamas and no shoes, and his hair was wild like he'd been pulling at it. "Mr. Henderson?" Marcus called through the door. "Are you all right?" Harold stopped scratching and pressed his face against the peephole. Marcus jerked back. "Harold's, I was right there, bloodshot and twitching." "Let me in," Harold whispered. "I need to check something." Marcus called out that he was going to phone the police if Harold didn't go home. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped. The next morning, there were deep gouge marks in their front door, and Harold was back in his driveway at 8:03 a.m., staring. Marcus called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. They said they'd do a welfare check on Harold. When the officers went to the Henderson house, Betty answered the door. She seemed confused when they asked about Harold's behavior. She insisted Harold had been in bed all week with the flu and hadn't left the house. But Marcus knew what he'd seen. The breaking point came 3 days later. Marcus woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom and happened to glance out his bedroom window. Harold Henderson was standing in their backyard, maybe 20 feet from the house, just standing there in the dark. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and went outside to confront him, but Harold was gone. The only evidence he'd been there was a series of footprints in the mud, footprints that led from the back gate to directly under Marcus and Emma's bedroom window. That was enough. Marcus and Emma broke their lease and moved the following weekend. A month later, Marcus ran into Betty Henderson at the grocery store. She looked exhausted and much older than he remembered. "I'm sorry about Harold," she said quietly. "The doctors say it's dementia, but it came on so fast. He keeps talking about needing to watch the house, protect the neighborhood from something. We had to put him in a facility last week." Marcus felt bad for her, but he was glad they'd moved when they did. Alright, before we get to the final story, I want to remind you to subscribe if you haven't already. I post new horror content every week, and subscribing makes sure you don't miss anything. Plus, it really helps the channel grow. This last story comes from a woman named Kelly who lived in Pine Grove Estates, a newer development outside Portland. Kelly was a single mom with a 7-year-old daughter named Chloe. They'd moved to Pine Grove specifically for the schools and the safe family atmosphere. Their house was a small ranch-style home with a fenced backyard where Chloe could play safely. The neighborhood was full of young families, and Chloe quickly made friends with several kids on their street. The problems started during the summer when Chloe began spending more time outside. She'd come in for dinner talking about her new friend, who lived in the woods behind their house. Kelly wasn't concerned at first. Kids have imaginary friends, and there was a small patch of trees behind their neighborhood where the kids sometimes played. But Chloe's descriptions of this friend were oddly specific. "His name is Mr. Gray," Chloe told her mom. "He's really tall and wears a long coat. He knows lots of stories about the kids who used to live here." Kelly asked what Mr. Gray looked like, and Chloe drew a picture. A stick figure that was much taller than the trees around it, with long arms and what looked like a hat or hood covering its face. "Where exactly do you see Mr. Gray?" Kelly asked. Chloe pointed toward the tree line. "He stands right there and waves at me when I'm on the swings." Kelly looked out their back window but didn't see anyone. The trees were thick enough that someone could hide back there, but it seemed unlikely that an adult would be hanging around watching kids play. That evening, Kelly mentioned Mr. Gray to her neighbor Janet, whose daughter Mia was Chloe's age. Janet's expression changed immediately. "Mia's been talking about the same thing," she said. "Some tall man in gray clothes who watches them play." I thought she was making it up. They decided to ask around the neighborhood. It turned out that several kids had mentioned seeing the same figure, always described as very tall, always wearing gray or dark clothes, always standing just inside the tree line. None of the adults had seen him. Kelly started keeping Chloe inside more often, but that only seemed to make things worse. Chloe became obsessed with looking out the back windows, claiming Mr. Gray was trying to get her attention. "He wants me to come play in the woods," Chloe said one afternoon. "He says the other kids are waiting for me." That phrase, "the other kids are waiting," sent a chill down Kelly's spine. Kelly called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do about someone standing in the woods. The area behind the neighborhood was public land, and unless someone was trespassing on private property or threatening people directly, their hands were tied. The situation came to a head on a Thursday evening in late July. Kelly was making dinner when she realized she hadn't heard Chloe in a while. She called out but got no answer. Kelly found the back door open and Chloe's shoes missing. She ran outside and saw Chloe walking toward the tree line, moving slowly like she was in a trance. "Chloe!" Kelly shouted, but her daughter didn't respond. Kelly ran after her and grabbed Chloe's arm just as they reached the edge of the woods. Chloe seemed to snap out of whatever state she'd been in and looked confused about how she'd gotten outside. "Mr. Gray called my name," Chloe said. "He said it was time to meet the other children." Kelly looked into the woods but saw nothing except shadows and trees. But she could swear she heard something, a low sound that might have been voices or might have been wind. That night, Kelly did some research online about the area's history. What she found made her pack their bags immediately. Pine Grove Estates had been built on land that was previously owned by a man named Gerald Gray. In the 1980s, Gray had operated an unlicensed daycare center out of his property. Several children had gone missing while in his care, and Gray himself had disappeared before police could question him. The missing children were never found. Kelly and Chloe moved in with Kelly's parents the next day. Kelly never found out if there really was someone in those woods, or if it was just a story that had somehow worked its way into the kids' imaginations. But she wasn't taking any chances. That's it for tonight's stories. Let me know in the comments which one disturbed you the most, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more horror content. I'll see you in the next one.